Well, hello. Welcome to our live stream tonight, which is going to be not a very long one on the topic of protein. Well, our take on it. First, I'll just want to explain I have a very croaky voice. I woke up this morning with this, and I think partly because in previous days I've had a fairly stressful time. Had a wonderful time. Also, there was a wedding in the family, which was just beautiful. But my beautiful mother passed away yesterday, and had a few sleepless nights. This is an example of the other parts of lifestyle that impact health. So I woke up with a cold this morning. I won't talk about my mum tonight. Some of you watching may actually know her, have met her. Maybe I'll do another live stream just talking about her amazing life, and particularly the last 10 or 12 years when she went whole food plant-based and had some remarkable health improvements. But at 89, unfortunately, her life came to an end. Anyway, I'm going to pass over to Malcolm to talk about tonight's topic on protein.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, protein, and they go, not protein again. Where do you get your protein from? I guess I'll start off by saying that in human nutrition, there's a couple of dozen essential things you have to have as basic nutrients. And protein's one of them. But it's not usually the limiting factor in human nutrition. Usually the limiting factor is actually, or throughout history, has been getting enough calories of food. And so it bothers me when I see these tables and charts about, how many acres of land it takes to grow, protein, how much CO2 emissions per unit of protein. It's not really an appropriate unit, it should really be just per unit of calories. So protein doesn't come from animals, and as humans, we're animals, and we can't synthesize, amino acids from nitrates and things like that. So all of the protein for us, for the dog, for unfortunate livestock, it all comes from eating other things, from eating plants, and actually fungi and yeast and other microbes. But let's just say plants. So I guess for well over a century ago, they were talking about, well, we've discovered protein, and how much do people need? If you don't have protein, things just don't grow, and you can't survive. So how they calculate our protein needs was taking these subjects and looking at, nitrogen in, nitrogen out sort of studies, various techniques. And they come up with something like the subjects needed about 0.66 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And so they said, yeah, but there's a bit of variation from person to person. Let's add 2 standard deviations. In statistics, if you had, assuming it was a normal distribution, which it probably isn't, that would cover 97.5% of the population. So it would cover most people. So that brings us to a number of 0.8 grams per kilogram. So notice this is no longer your minimum protein requirements. You don't have to go, 0.8, I have to make sure I'm way above that. That's the minimum. That's already the recommended intake. And you can do other ways of looking at how much protein you need. For example, grams, just straight out grams of protein. It's like the 60 kilogram reference female or the 70 kilogram standard reference male. It comes out to about 48 grams for the female and about 60 grams per day for the male. That's a recommended intake with that safety margin. Or you can look at it another way and you can say, all right, let's look at what proportion of our macros, what percentage of the calories need to be protein. And if we take our reference person, giving them the recommended intake, and the reference male is eating 2,400 calories, and the reference female is eating about 2,000 calories, which is, probably a ballpark sort of correct, then it actually comes out to about 10% of calories from protein. Of course, when we eat plants, on average, our whole foods plant-based diet will usually give at least 12% of calories from protein. So there are some measures of protein, but then we can go down into the woods and get a bit lost here, because we can go, well, hang on, it's going to vary a bit. Like, if you're doing long fasts, if you're not eating enough carbs, your body will break down amino acids to make gluconeogenesis. From where they're not coming back again. So yeah, when people eat more a regular intake of carbohydrates, they protect themselves from losing that protein. The other thing is the reference population. I looked up that, and people get caught up and go 0.8, and maybe in vegans it should be 0.9 grams per kilogram. And then you go and look, and I tried to find out what the reference was, because the protein needs are really related to your lean body mass. Now, I had one of those DEXA scans done last year, so I could, pretty look up mine and know what it is. But most of us don't really have much idea how much of our body is not body fat, but is, lean tissue. But when they calculated these protein requirements, they just said, "Oh no, the subjects were, normal sort of weight range," and you think, were they BMI of 20? Were they BMI of 24? Like, if the protein needs related to the amount of lean body tissue you've got, that could be a 20% variation in whether your subjects had very little body fat or a more average or above average amount. So you can see that it gets all a little bit inaccurate, which is a bit frustrating. The next little chart after that little conundrum, the next little chart we're not showing you because it is on our website under protein, is we had a look, and
which I'll put a link to in the comments.
So people often have these charts of how much protein per gram of food, and it's like they go, "Oh, look at peanuts," or look at what do they all say for protein? Seeds.
Pumpkin seeds.
Pumpkin seeds, aren't they high in protein? But I think, if we're sort of eating an approximate number of calories per day, then we sort of need to adjust these foods for how many calories they have. So very high calorie dense food, which if you're eating them all day, you'd only eat a small amount, otherwise you'd rapidly gain weight, might have more protein, but they also have more calories. So our chart we've got adjusts for that and says, all right, then we want to look at protein per 100 calories. Or even just straight out percent protein. And you know how nuts are, in that protein group in the dietary guidelines, and whole grains aren't, and legumes are. If you look at it per calorie, then per 100 calories or percent protein, the nuts and the grains, the range of values in different nuts and grains are approximately equal. Like almonds are about 14% protein but oats and wheat are also about 14% protein. So I need to put in a suggestion for the next dietary guidelines that whole grains not only have their own group, but they're also in the protein group as well. And that's important, as I'll come to a bit later, right at the end. So the next thing that we think often isn't looked at, and it's sort of one of our little unique things so that you don't get too bored, is looking at what happens when you add oil to the diet. And we've got some nutters, don't call them nutters, we've got some Mediterranean diet enthusiasts out there who go completely over the top and say 3 tablespoons of olive oil per day. And it's like, really? Do you know how many calories that is? That's about 480 calories per day. So we did this little chart or came up with some calculations about, okay, if I had 2,000 calories in a day, let's say our reference, female person eats about 2,000 calories a day. If it's about 12% protein, because it's sort of pretty average whole plant foods, not particularly heavy in legumes or anything special, 12% protein, they'll get about 60 grams of protein, so plenty of protein. What would happen if you replace some of those whole foods with 3 tablespoons of olive oil. You go from 60 grams of protein in that person's 2,000 calorie diet down to only 45.6, technically just under their requirements, but probably won't matter. Even if it was, 1 tablespoon of olive oil in the day, it'd reduce the amount of protein this person is getting from 60 grams down to 55. So one way to boost your protein intake is minimize the foods that use up your day's calories but have zero protein, like sugar, soft drink, alcoholic beverages, and in particular, oil. Now, of course, we can go on about oil, and we heard someone saying the other day that, well, there's some. It's looking pretty healthy. Some of the studies of olive oil, and perhaps if someone's very lean, almost a bit underweight, perhaps it'd be good for them to have some olive oil. They won't only end up having less protein; they'll end up having less fiber.
Less calcium,
if
less
it's
iron.
if they're a female with increased iron needs, it just might tip the balance and put them into iron deficiency by having those few hundred calories a day from food that has no, as Denny said, no calcium, no iron, no protein, no. A little bit of vitamin E. Who gets deficient in vitamin E? No one, actually. The next little thing is athletes. And again, we're putting a little bit of a tilt on this just to not sound too boring. But, the standard recommendation is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. So you go to the gym twice a week and you do an exercise class or two. So you need more. No, the basic standard 0.8 grams per kilogram actually covers a light to moderate level of physical activity. So you're still, the recommended intake for you is still that level. The next level of physical activity is a high level of physical activity. And these are endurance athletes. These are daily moderate to intense fitness training. I'm a bit of a fitness nut, and I'll probably slip into that category. So that's only 1.2 grams per kilogram. Again, very easy to meet that. It'd be hard to get below that. Perhaps even as high as 1.4, some people say. Then the third category is professional bodybuilders, strength-based athletes, where it's gain muscle at all costs. And of course, I've been going to the gym since about October. I've been really working hard, trying to increase my lean mass and, building a bit of muscle in the biceps and the legs and where it really counts. I don't really want biceps for show, but I do want to be able to lift a 10-kilo bag of potatoes. And I'm making some gains. But, this is not this category, which is not me. Right. This is for, your 20-year-old rapidly gaining muscle mass, or your hunky bodybuilder, or you discus or shot put person. These are real athletes, and their recommendation is 1.6 grams per kilogram, possibly as high as 2, but not 2 or 3 grams more. You get to a level where you just make yourself sick. The other thing, of course, happens if you exercise more. Guess what happens if you're someone who actually is at one of those, higher levels of physical activity and goes from needing 0.8 to needing 1.2 or so? Well, it's very disappointing for people. You look up those charts and it says, I have to walk 53 kilos to burn off that cheeseburger or so.
53 kilometers.
Slight exaggeration. But anyway, it looks like an awful lot of activity, really. The human body is very efficient at transporting itself. However, if you get up to fairly high levels, like say you're running 10 kilometers a day, or walking 15. Walking is a bit more efficient than running. You'd actually, the 10 kilometre per day person, or equivalent of sort of moderate to high level physical activity, is going to need about 30% more calories in the day. So assuming that they're sort of maintaining their weight, be a 30% increase in food. So even eating the same concentration of food, this of protein in their food, just from eating more calories, they, in this example, will go up from 1.2 grams per kilogram to 1.6 grams per kilogram just because they eat more food, because they do more activity. Quite.
Before you leave the athletes, we'll take this question. Are you about to go on to another topic? Yeah. So a question about, is 12% intake protein adequate for a woman aged over 55 who's trying to build muscle mass?
Well, yes, although if you're trying to lose weight at the same time, that can change the equation, and we'll come to that one. That's quite an interesting one that doesn't get discussed much in the plant-based world, where all of us, including us, just keep saying to people, just eat a variety of whole plant foods, meet your energy needs, you'll get enough protein. What about if you're on a weight loss diet? But before we go there, what about the elderly? And I don't know, but sometimes the elderly get younger and younger, and surely the elderly can't be.
It might include you, but not me.
It might include me. The day having turned 65 last year, maybe on in March last year, my protein needs suddenly increased. I really don't think so. Dr. Michael Greger, in his books, like, for example, in How Not to Age, he looks at this, and he's sort of quite dismissive of the protein needs for the elderly, although it is quite a nuanced subject, really, when you start to think about it. But it's very tainted. The protein needs for older people is just so tainted by industry, by the meat and dairy industry funding. And
funding for research. Yeah.
Our previous dietary guidelines sort of had a background paper that quoted a non-statistically significant small study to sort of show that maybe older people needed more protein. And it's like, okay, so they might actually, there's been numerous studies of older or elderly people older than me, who have often looked at strength training, and they go, what about if we give them more protein? Generally not consistently a significant benefit. If the older person does strength training, generally they're going to gain muscle with extra protein, not really being a significant factor in their muscle gain. So it's sometimes recommended that the elderly people have not 0.8 but 1.0 grams per kilogram. It's not really much more, is it? Particularly when you consider how inaccurate the calculation of, when applied to the individual, how inaccurate the protein recommendations are. So I guess in the elderly people, there's many factors that are going to come into this, and one of them is, if you're sick and unwell and got some chronic disease, then that will tend to kick the body into a catabolic, breakdown state, where it'll tend to want to break down proteins and things, which is be hard to overcome just with diet. The other thing is very sedentary lifestyle, very small muscles, inadequate food intake, and sarcopenia. That's like muscle wasting, but muscle wasting can even be in someone who's normal body weight for size, or even a bit overweight, but the muscles have reshrunken, so their actually basic calorie needs will be quite low there. And so when it comes to nutrition in the elderly, we think that the more important problem is an inadequate intake in calories, and an inadequate intake of like whole plant foods that are rich in nutrients and will provide adequate protein. Whereas the biscuit and the margarine and the oil and things, it's not going to help them with their protein. And this sort of branches out from the elderly and the muscle mass and things to strength, to gaining muscle. What about if you're trying to gain some muscle? And it's important to have more muscle mass for your metabolic health. It makes your bones stronger. There's a lot of advantages to having a little bit more muscle bulk and strength that you tend to lose if you don't use, or with age it tends to decrease too. Protein intake beyond your needs, your requirements, has, I won't say zero, has minimal additional benefits. But you'll see all these particular studies, and someone might say, when we gave them this particular, whey protein or something straight after exercise, or when we saw that the muscles did a lot more protein synthesis. So we got an acceleration of protein synthesis in the period immediately after exercise, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's I don't really care if my bicep synthesizes more protein, for an hour or two after I go to the gym. I wanted to get stronger, over a period of weeks, and that's where some of these protein studies fall down because they don't really show any appreciable benefit when you actually look at long-term gains in muscle mass and muscle strength. The key to gaining muscle is resistance training, functional fitness or gym work, something that actually puts a heavy weight, a heavy load on muscles. And that really is the key to making muscles stronger and in the long term bones as well. Now, coming back to this, is 12% intake of protein adequate for a woman aged over 55, age 55 who's trying to build muscle mass? Um, what happens when you're trying to lose weight? A lot of us, through no fault of our own, have built up some reserves that we no longer need in the 21st century, but might have been great for hunter-gatherers. And so we had to look at this scenario of how much protein you might need if you actually, got a restricted calorie intake because you're trying to lose weight, and not ridiculously restricted, just, moderately, right? Someone has 10, 20 kilos they need to shake off. And so looking at two subjects, one was the female with the sort of the ideal weight. You both had this virus. It's not COVID
You
though.
both had.
Um,
Where did I get mine from?
the French relatives on Friday and over the weekend. Couldn't have been me. But so we have our reference female who is at a healthy weight, is around 60 kilos, but actually at the moment she's quite a bit heavier than that and needs to shake off some weight. So has a diet that's restricted to only 1,200 calories a day. Right, so we've got a female 60 who's heading towards a normal weight of 60 kilos, eating 1,200 calories. Protein requirements about 48 grams for that person. If you just look up the 0.8 grams per kilogram, but because the calorie intake's down, the protein's going to need to be more concentrated in the diet. If you actually work out the percent calories required to hit that 48 grams on that restricted calorie intake, it's 16% of calories. So, and then we had a male example who was trying to get down to 70 kilos and restricting to 1,600 calories per day. And they would require about 14% of calories from protein. So you can see someone on a long-term weight reduction diet is going to need a higher proportion of their diet from protein. In these scenarios, they might need to make a few adjustments. Brown rice and fruit probably won't quite cut it. So some tweaks could be, instead of choosing the brown rice, choose a wheat product or an oat product or a quinoa product, which are all up around the 15% protein rather than less than 10. If you're a big potato eater, the ordinary potatoes rather than the sweet potatoes because they're higher in protein. And of course, add some legumes in. Be reasonably generous with legumes. I mean, they're about 25% of calories from protein. That'll really bump up your daily intake. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting scenario that if you're actually on a long-term weight loss calorie restricted diet, then you might need to try a little bit harder to bump up your protein, the concentration of protein in your diet. I think the next thing, I don't want to
No, you don't need to cover it all.
No, I don't want to labour protein quality too much, except to tell you it does my head in when I keep reading like our nutritionists we love to, it's like some of the others now have sort of brought this term back that sort of got buried many decades ago of quality protein. And I know why she puts quality protein in there, and I know who she works for with some of these animal ag industries. And really, when they put that, quality protein, what they're really doing is putting a positive spin on animal products and implying quietly that plant protein, that there are other proteins, therefore, that must be lower in quality. It takes the focus too off. If you call a piece of chicken protein, there's a lot more in there than chicken, people. I mean, than protein. If you call a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or meat or an egg protein, then it sort of takes the focus off all the saturated fat and the other harmful ingredients in meat, eggs, and dairy. And yes, it is true that of the 20 amino acids that our proteins are built of, there's about our bodies can interchange one amino. I said it couldn't make amino acids, but it can sort of swap the heads and tails of amino acids, turn one type into another. Except 9 of them, it can't. It has to have them in exactly the same way that the plant or the fungi made them. And this is where the idea of protein quality comes in. That if you had a protein that was completely lacking one of those 9, like gelatin, that's collagen, people, then and that's all you ate day in, day out, you'd run out of protein because your body wouldn't be able to use it because it would need that missing amino acid. No plant's completely missing any of those essential amino acids, but a lot of plants will have the one or other of those essential amino acids at a lower level than our body requirement. And this is important when you're trying to grow livestock or breed rats. They need a lot of protein, rats. And you're trying to get maximum growth for minimum protein and input. That's not what we're trying to do as humans. And there's, fortunately for us, remember the protein complementarity charts of yesteryear? Was anyone here around in the 1970s or 80s? Maybe they weren't, Jenny. Maybe we are the elderly. There are all these charts, combined beans and grains, and then the lysine, one low in lysine, the other's low in methionine to balance up. We don't need to do that because the body actually sort of stores some amino acids, not long term, but it will store some, from day to day, so that, we don't have to try and combine proteins together at different meals and things. So we don't really have to worry about protein quality. Well, yes, we do, because some of the so-called high quality protein is animal protein, and it is very high in some of the amino acids that cause a bit of mischief in our body, that cause an acid load on the kidneys, that upregulate, that make us insulin resistant, that upregulate some of the growth hormones, IGF-1 and mTOR, for example, which unfortunately also promote aging and cancer growth. So the very things that make the so-called quality proteins quality actually makes them worse for health. We don't want all that lysine, it raises cholesterol. We want more, is it arginine? It helps to lower cholesterol. So what about if my protein supplements plant-based? Surely that'll be okay. Well, no, we don't think so. We have a slogan, eat peas, not pea protein, because there's a displacement effect. Like if you're eating a concentrated protein, it's like eating a concentrated sugar or a concentrated oil. You've lost all the fiber and all the other nutrients. So those extra calories from the protein powder are not really going to help your nutrition overall. And it's very unlikely that you actually need more protein, and you might as well just eat some beans instead. And they say, but T. Colin Campbell studies showed they didn't seem to promote cancer in rodents nibbling rodent pellets all day long, higher or lower in protein. The rats weren't slugging down, many, many grams of protein powder after their workout, though. Although plant proteins are not going to have as many of those amino acids that sort of cause mischief, like the branch chain and the methionine, types of amino acids. If you eat enough of them, you know, bump up the levels of those. And actually, soy protein is an example because soy is sort of midway between plant and animal protein in its sort of amino acid balance. And when I read that, I thought maybe I should stop eating it. But then I was reminded that you know, lots of long-term studies only show better health outcomes, less cancer, etc., but with a moderate amount of soy products. So I do eat a moderate amount of soy. But I wouldn't take soy protein powder, and there actually have been some studies that show that if you eat more than 25 grams of soy protein powder, you actually upregulate IGF-1, you know, which is sort of a, a hormone, a growth hormone that's, for example, associated with prostate cancer. So the final point is, which plants are proteins? Please, people, stop calling foods proteins, good fats, or carbs, because generally whole plant foods are a complex combination of all three and defy being divided up. You know, if is the chickpea 70% carbohydrate? It's like, can it still be a protein because it's high in protein, or
Carbs, you mean?
Hmm?
You said high in protein.
All right.
Still high in
Yeah.
carbohydrate.
If it's 70, if the chickpea is 70% carbs and 25% protein, like, I don't know, is that just a protein food? And what about the wheat that's about 14% protein? I don't know. Is that a protein? So when you start to sort of talk about, you know, well, we're going to have this plate model, and we're going to have a quarter of the plate as protein, and a quarter of carbohydrate, and half of non-starchy vegetables. It's sort of like, you talk about whole plant foods, it starts to not really make sense. Although the plate model that has some whole grains and has some legumes on it, I'm all for that. Like, legumes are really healthy, so are whole grains. The other thing, people often go and they have some protein chart and it says, look how high in protein broccoli is. Like, you know, I don't know, it might be, you know, 50 or 60% of calories from protein. You know, it'd be right if it had any calories, but, you know, the leafy green and cruciferous vegetables are super healthy, and they're not very high in calories, but the calories they do have. So yeah, you can get lots of nutrients and goodies without excess calories. Eat lots of them. So I had a little bit of a think about that too, and sort of thought, well, how relevant is the protein in broccoli and leafy greens and things? They've got a very high water content, you see. But I actually looked at that, and you actually get about 2 or 3 grams of protein per 100 grams. So, you know, if you eat a few hundred grams of these, you know, of broccoli and green leafy vegetables, yeah, it could add a small but significant proportion of your addition to your daily protein intake. So not insignificant, but not really your major source of protein in the diet. So I just finished with a comment that a sort of take-home message is that when you're doing your plate and your healthy plate, you know, don't sort of get tied up and think, I have to have a protein food on that plate to meet my protein requirements. If you're eating adequate calories, with some little proviso we've talked about, if you're eating adequate calories of whole plant foods, even if your bowl was just, you know, wheat berries or oats and vegetables, you're still going to get enough protein. You don't actually have to have a special protein food on the plate.
Well, I said it was going to be a short talk. Okay, excuse me. So what else have we got? There's so Ron appreciates the timing of this. It's so easy to go down a rabbit hole. There is just so much out there, both within the plant-based world and outside it. And you know, we often say, I mean, people who, you know, we all want to be evidence-based and we want to follow the research. But as Malcolm said, the research is so tainted by industry with, you know, the 20 years of protein research coming out of a couple of universities funded by the Beef Cattlemen's Association in the US. So, you know, it's just ubiquitous anyway. And of course, it influences plant-based experts as well in reading this research and thinking that, you know, that what they find is important. But it raises that point that I think we talked about in our previous talk on omega-3, that when nutrition research that looks at, one thing, the effect of one thing on one other thing, they often are doing it if there's an agenda to show benefit of that particular food. Then they actually don't ever mention the downsides. And, we went through that with omega-3 and obviously with protein, the downsides of too much protein.
The downsides
and the
of the
to
so-called
kidneys
quality protein. Yeah,
and
like the elderly, for example, they say the elderly need more protein. I mean, they often need more food and more nutritious food. Even if they do need more protein, though, Jenny found some statistics the other day. Quite a big proportion of elderly people
in
have
Australia, this was in Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, over 75, it's like 50% have poor kidney function. And that they're all being told that they need more protein, which, of course, if they're not specifically trying to be plant-based, they're going to eat more meat. That's what they're going to focus on, which is damaging to the kidneys.
Yeah, when you eat more, particularly animal-based proteins, you put the kidneys sort of into a hyperfiltration, into an overdrive state for several hours afterwards, and over a period of time accelerate the rate of kidney decline. And so if someone has some poor kidney function, the last thing they need is more protein, particularly the animal protein.
I was going to pick up on that question asking about iron from protein, and we'll just, I'm sure you meant to say iron from meat, but that is more absorbable. The heme iron is more absorbable from animal foods. But yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things about that. It's like if you're not a female of reproductive age and losing blood and iron, then you're more likely to actually run into iron overload. And iron, like iron goes rusty. Iron is a sort of pro-oxidant. Heme iron is actually a bit damaging in the body, damages, pancreas, insulin function, and things like that. So you don't actually, heme iron is associated with heart disease and disease. So the same quality iron in red meat and to some degree in chicken and fish that's really well absorbed is also not quality for health. And it was asking iron from other foods. Actually, legumes have a fair bit of iron, grains a moderate amount. When you get there'll be iron in your leafy green vegetables and things, although there's a couple of groups of leafy greens that are where the iron and the calcium are not well absorbed because they're high in oxalates. That's spinach and silver beet and other beets. Doesn't mean to avoid those, but if spinach and silver beet were your only vegetables that you thought were giving you iron, you won't actually absorb the iron very well from those. Someone mentioned soy.
And the point that Malcolm made earlier about get rid of the no protein foods like the oils. It's the same with iron. If you're having olive oil in your diet, that's displacing foods which could contain iron.
Or if you're having white pasta and white rice and the bread that sort of almost might have been wholemeal, but if you turn the packet around, you find the first ingredient's basically white flour. Refined grains, will have less than half of the iron left in them as well. Someone mentioned soy. Yeah, there's been a lot of dirt heaped on soy over the years by industry, and the misunderstanding that it contains estrogen-like compounds, so therefore must have estrogen-like effects on the body. It's actually turned out to be around the other way. The phytoestrogens in soy and many other plants, they get into the body, sort of have sort of throw a spanner in the estrogen works and sort of down-regulate estrogen signaling in the body. Hence, soy is actually associated with less breast cancer, which tends to be fueled by estrogen.
And modest regular soy consumption is associated with, fewer hot flashes, relief of menopause symptoms.
So you can now consider that the estrogen, the plant estrogen-like plant substances in soy and other whole plant foods actually seem to have a regulatory, positive effect on the body. And the foods we'd really warn you about that have real animal estrogen in them are dairy foods and other animal foods like chicken and eggs.
And nice to hear from you, Shamiz. Great that you're watching us. So, yeah, love your work. Anyone else got any questions before we sign off for tonight? If not, then Beverly, I appreciate your condolences. Thank you. And
that's why we're wearing purple.
My mother's
Mum
favourite colour was
really
purple.
into purple. Half her wardrobe was purple.
In her latter years, I think 100% of her wardrobe was purple. In fact, friends called her, the great lady of purple. So for those that missed the start of this little live stream, my mother passed away yesterday. And so that's why I'm staying very quiet and my voice is very croaky because I'm not feeling great. Anyway, distraction's really good. So I'm feeling quite happy now. We really love talking to our community. So thank you everyone for following on, and thank you to those who in the future take the time to watch our live stream. So we'll say good night, everyone. And
good night and goodbye until the next
one.
live stream.
Okay. Bye.